Hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. Or if you live in Australia, as several, if not many of you do, I am and have always been your Wednesday host. I don't know why I've never thought of that before, because this is not the first time we've had an Australian team member, and I definitely know several of you out there in YouTube land who live in Australia, and I know that you're like 16 to 18 hours ahead of my time zone. So I don't know why I've never thought of that before, but especially trying to put together the schedule for the permanent schedule of our new substitute hosts, and one of them being in Australia, and the whole day being different has made me think about the fact that I am your Wednesday host if you are in Australia. So, hey viewers, my name's Cara. I'm your Tuesday/Wednesday host here on the Pagan Perspective, depending on the time zone in which you live. And this week, we're talking about orthodoxy and orthopraxy. I do not remember the name of the person who suggested this right now because I don't have the topic up on split screen on my phone like I normally do for a longer one if I'm going to read it to you. But it will be in the description of this video as always. And I don't have it up on the split screen because it's pretty simple this week. It's just our thoughts about orthodoxy and orthopraxy and which one we think most closely fits our path. So, a little table of contents for you for this video. I'm going to talk about definitions real quick. I'm going to tell you a story about something that happened years ago, about a decade ago, when I first started on YouTube. Sort of my initial experience with the way that people use these terms in a pagan, neo-pagan, magical construct. Third, I'm going to tell you about something that I read last night, briefly, just because it got me thinking more about this topic in a different way. And then really the last biggest thing of the video is different ways that I am now thinking about these terms much differently than I did when I first started and this first experience that I'll tell you about in a moment. So firstly, orthodoxy and orthopraxy are words that come from Greek, and they essentially mean, like, I don't know if they're the literal translations, but there's a couple different ways that people define these words, basically. One is correct belief and correct practice, orthodoxy and orthopraxy, praxis, practice, respectively there. Another way of saying it is right belief or right practice. So not everyone uses the word correct, but that's typically how we think of it. And before I get into what I think about those terms now, I want to take us back to about 10 years ago when I was starting posting videos about witchcraft and neo-paganism and my spiritual path on YouTube. I was 18 going on 19, and at the time there were still a lot of people on the internet who just constantly wanted to tell me that I was wrong. And at the time, I was still mostly identifying with Wicca specifically. So I was identifying as a solitary eclectic Wiccan. That sets off a lot of flags for a lot of people who think that those words don't go together or can't go together or shouldn't go together. And that has to do with what people consider the correct belief or the correct practice. So when I first encountered these words, it was because as not a fully baby witch, because I had been practicing for years before I started on YouTube, but as a baby witch on the internet, as a baby YouTuber, people liked to tell me that I couldn't identify the way that I wanted to identify because there was no way that I knew what I had to know in order to be a Wiccan witch. And basically their argument to me was, because you're not in a coven, because you haven't been initiated by other people who are initiated into their own respective tradition in a coven, you cannot possibly know the things that you need to know in order to call yourself a Wiccan witch. And I was confused by this because people write books and I read books and I learn things. So, like, I understand that there are things that are basically initiate only that do exist, but we're talking about 10 years ago. And I was just very confused. And so I was always telling people, well, you know, what do you consider the characteristic beliefs of Wiccan practice? Because obviously lots of different types of pagans and neo-pagans have different beliefs. And I was saying, well, the reason that I identify as a solitary eclectic Wiccan is that of all the research that I've done about various neo-pagan paths that I knew about a decade ago, Wicca most closely fits my core beliefs, and so that's why I identify that way. And I don't identify as a traditional Wiccan or as an initiate or anything like that, because I'm not, and so I don't say that. But so I identify as a solitary eclectic to try to be open and honest with people about that fact that I am not covened, I am not lineaged, I am not initiated, etc. And basically what I was hearing from these people was, it doesn't matter what you believe because Wicca is not orthodoxic. It's not about correct beliefs or having the right beliefs. They were saying it is orthopraxic. It doesn't matter what you believe if you believe all the same things as us. It matters what you do. And so essentially what they were saying now, 10 years later, I can see that they were probably referring to things like the way that Wiccans cast circle, and the way that Wiccans draw down the moon, and the way that Wiccans invoke their deity, or even maybe the deities that they specifically worship. I don't know exactly what they meant. They never really told me. They just said, there's no way you know how to do the things that you need to know how to do in order to call yourself what you're calling yourself, and it's got nothing to do with the belief. And this really confused me because, and it still kind of confuses me, because I think if you don't believe any of the same things that a specific religious group believes, then you can't call yourself that, because that makes no sense to me, right? So way back then, I was much more regularly in contact with everyone's favorite Annie, Mirth and Reverence. Shout out, Annie. Love you. Miss you. I really need to email you more often. We used to email a lot more often after Annie left Pagan Perspective. But anyway, I love going back and telling these stories because Annie was very helpful to me when I was first starting on YouTube doing all of this. So I went to Annie back then and I said, Annie, what the heck? People are being mean and they're telling me that it doesn't matter what I believe and that I can't be a Wiccan witch because I don't know the things that I need to know, and because it's orthopraxy and it's not orthodoxy, but I don't understand how you can be a Wiccan if you don't believe the things that Wiccans believe. Like, what do they mean? This makes no sense. This is my remembrance of it, okay? Again, it's been 10 years. Annie might have different views on this now, so please don't take anything as like I'm telling you what Mirth and Reverence teaches right now today, because this was a decade ago and it was just conversations that we had. But how do I even want to say this? Basically, she said that to her, it was both. Yeah, there are certain practices that are characteristic of Wicca, and so that would be the orthopraxis. But there are definitely also core beliefs that are known as Wiccan beliefs, as opposed to Druidic beliefs or Norse beliefs or whatever. Like, there are definitely core beliefs that characterize Wicca, but a lot of people consider it practice-based because it matters what you do. So what we did was, she and I talked about what we considered the core beliefs that we thought, you know, really defined Wicca as opposed to something else. And that doesn't mean that Wicca is the only branch that believed these ways. These were just the things, the combination of which is the reason that I felt most closely drawn to Wicca 10 years ago. And, these were things like Wiccans believe in God and goddess, and that balance and that polarity. And Wiccans do have a belief in magic and following the wheel of the year. Although now, flashback to today, I now recognize that following the wheel of the year is actually more of an orthopraxic thing. But anyway, these are the things that back then we were like, these are the core beliefs that we really think, like, this is why people are drawn to Wicca, if they believe these things. And if they don't believe those things, but they cast circle the same way, those people likely aren't going to call themselves Wiccans just because they cast circle the same way as a Wiccan if they don't have the same beliefs in deity as a Wiccan. You know what I mean? So she basically just helped me calm down about the fact that people use these terms differently, and that, at least as far as she was concerned, it is about both. And that, it wasn't accurate for these naysayers to have told me it doesn't matter about belief at all, because of course it does, right? So this is kind of how I've always been from then until now, is that it's both. Yeah, there are beliefs that are specific to the way that we choose to identify. And then there are also practices that go along with those beliefs. It tends to be that the way that we practice is the way that we practice because of the belief that underlies that practice. If you have a completely different belief underneath it, you are likely to do a practice differently than I am. So it depends on what we're talking about. And now for something completely different. Yesterday I read The Perfection of Yoga, which is one of the only books that when my partner and I moved in together and combined our libraries, that we both had a copy of this book. And I had never read it before, but I picked it up at a secondhand shop when I was helping them organize their books, and they said I could take any of the ones that I wanted because they never look through them. So I grabbed this. It is by this individual whose name I will not attempt to pronounce. I read this last night. It's much shorter than I thought it would be, even though it's teeny tiny. But it is a very short book about the perfection of yoga and basically what yoga is as a belief and a practice. The thing that ties into this is page 34 and 35. It's chapter 5, the section on yoga as freedom from duality and designation. Talks about, and again, there are Sanskrit words that I do not know how to pronounce and I have not looked up on the internet yet, so I will not attempt right now and get them totally wrong. But it's basically talking about how there is theoretical knowledge and then there's practical knowledge, right? So it talks about, for instance, I'm reading, quote, "For instance, a science student has to study theoretical scientific conceptions as well as applied science. Theoretical knowledge alone will not help. One has to be able to also apply this knowledge. Similarly, in yoga, one should have not only theoretical understanding, but a practical knowledge." Next page, it goes on. It's talking about how once you have gotten past not only having the theoretical knowledge of yogic beliefs, but when those beliefs have been realized on a practical level, so when you have reached practical realization is the phrasing that is used here, that is a sign that the person is fully situated in yoga. So that got me thinking, all right, yeah, theory versus practice. Kind of similar, right? Because it's talking about you not only have the theoretical knowledge, but you also know how to put it into practice. So this can go along with you not only have the right belief, but you also then take that belief and let it inform your practice. So right belief informs right practice. And by right, I should say, we mean in a pagan, neo-pagan, etc. Construct and framework, we don't typically believe that we have the one right way as some other religions do. So when we say right, we don't mean the only right way that's right for everyone ever and we all have to do it the right way. We mean within the frame of the path or the tradition being spoken about at that time. So with the example of Wicca, it would be, what is the correct belief of Wicca? What is Wiccan belief and what is Wiccan practice? If we're talking about Druidry, it is, what is Druid belief and what is Druid practice? And then if it's split off into different branches and different schools of thought within those same paths, basically, then it would be, what is right for that specific tradition and what are the practices that come out of those specific beliefs, right? So it doesn't mean this is right for everybody everywhere and we think these are the only right beliefs. So yeah, belief and practice, theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. And then just reading that theoretical and practical knowledge made me think, if we get out of the mindset of just thinking about religious belief and practice, or even if we say spiritual belief and practice, because I know not all of you like the word religion, and broaden that to all of life, it goes from not just being about belief and practice, but thoughts and actions. So, right thought and right action. So when I got to thinking about thoughts versus action as maybe even we could say a more secular way of looking at this, then I realized that although for my spiritual path, I do consider it really a blending of the two, because I think that my practices and the reason that I do things the way that I do is because of the things that I believe. The overall way that I live my life in the general world, I feel that I am more based on orthopraxis in that regard, because I tend to be the kind of person who doesn't care as much about what you say or what you think. I care about what you do. Actions speak louder than words, that kind of thing. So if I was someone who really cared mostly about what people believe, then I might have a harder time making more friends. So I definitely have a lot of friends who believe very differently from me. I mean, look at this channel right here. But it is important to me what we do, specifically how we treat each other. So we can believe very different things, but if we still agree to respect one another and support one another and, and of course I'm speaking of beliefs that do not inherently mean that we hate the other person, right? I'm talking about beliefs like, do you cast a circle or not? And do you work with the elements or not? And which deities you worship or not, that kind of thing. Obviously, if someone's religious or spiritual belief is that homosexuality is evil and sinful and those people deserve to be stoned to death, then I'm not going to get along with that person, because that belief is something that is physically offensive to me. So, some people would say, well, yeah, I would never actually do that. Like, I'm not going to stone a person to death, but yeah, I believe they deserve it. No. So yeah, in that case, I care about their belief more than the fact that they would never actually do the action. So yeah, it really depends on what we're talking about, doesn't it? But yeah, if we're talking about just beliefs, like I'm a pagan and my one friend is Jewish and my one friend is Catholic and my other friend's a Protestant and my other friend's an atheist and my other friend is, I don't know, something else. A Scientologist. I don't know any Scientologists, but I'm just saying. That's cool as long as the beliefs in question are not actually harmful to the other people and don't prevent them from living full and happy lives with all the rights to which we are entitled, you know. But yeah, just in general life, I think that what we do says a lot about us, and I think it should be informed by our beliefs. I feel like whenever we have beliefs or we profess to believe a certain way or think a certain way, but our actions do not support that, that is bothersome to me. And for me personally, when I feel like my own practice, my own actions day to day are not lining up with my beliefs, that starts to feel bad to me, right? That feels out of line. That feels, one might say, hypocritical. It starts to feel wrong, right? That cognitive dissonance that I say I believe this thing, but my actions do not follow suit. So it really comes back to it being both for me, doesn't it? When it comes to my personal path, honestly, that sometimes starts to feel dissonant as well, because it's kind of like, well, yeah, I believe these things. I believe that these certain things have importance, but then I don't always get around to doing the thing that goes with them. So it's really a personal path in every way, shape, or form. But definitely for me, I tend to look for fellow pagans and neo-pagans and witches, you know, all of these terms that I have to keep saying, all of these people. I tend to look for people who actually want to do the things, because, yeah, it's hard as a solitary. When it's just me, it's much easier to let things fall away if I'm not feeling well or if there's something else going on. It's a little bit easier because my partner is also pagan, and so, although they're not really a practicing one. And so I have the opportunity sometimes to do a thing that both of us can participate in. So I have the opportunity to design ritual for someone else to attend other than just me. You know, that's nice. But I find myself wanting to reach out and find more people who actually want to do the things, right? Like I don't like anymore just the talking about our beliefs and the knowing that so many other people out there share our beliefs. Although that is a great comfort, and I love my online friends for sure. Like, I would not trade the fact that I've been able to meet so many like-minded people on the internet for any kind of alternative. But I just find that as my path progresses and as I feel a little bit more and more isolated as my life continues and my life's circumstances change, that I want to find more people who really want to do the things together. Like, I've always been that way. Even in college, I was like, oh, this person's pagan too? Do you want to, like, get together and do something for the full moon or for the Sabbath? Like, do you want to... Yeah, like, do you want to celebrate together? Do you want to work on something together? And people were always like, no, that's okay. I'll just do it by myself. Like, that's fine. And I was like, oh, yeah, cool. That's cool. I just do everything by myself, too. That's cool. Why doesn't anybody want to do anything? So, yeah, it's really frustrating. It's definitely both. But I think I lean a little bit more toward orthopraxis, really, which is hilarious to think back 10 years ago when people were telling me you can't be what you want to say you are because you don't know how to do anything. Which, by the way, in my conversation with Annie, revealed that I actually did know a lot of the things. Again, because people write books about it. And yes, there are definitely specific things that are kept secret within a tradition that you don't get to know until you're part of that individual group of people, and I understand that. And there are some things about my personal practice that I keep that way as well, that I will only reserve for actual students if they exist in the future, or for my descendants in general. So I get that, I respect that. But yeah, other than that, as I've gone on through my life, I've also like posted pictures of the altar at the Buckland Museum and Gallery in Cleveland, because the first time I went to that and I met Raymond Buckland, and I just looked at the altar and I just, like, for a minute couldn't believe that, yeah, like, the altar that Raymond Buckland, who many people consider the father of American witchcraft, the altar in his museum that he was standing next to looks exactly like the ones in the books. And it looks exactly like what I did when I was 11. You know, like, yeah, we really have learned things from books. And you can't necessarily learn everything just from the books, and that's where the practice part comes in. That's the theoretical versus the practical knowledge. That I read and read and read and read and read so many books, but I didn't learn more in depth about the actual practices that I was reading about and thinking about and intellectualizing. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't actually learn more about those things until I got up off my butt and walked around the room and cast a circle and, like, did the practice. So, yeah. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments or in your own video response what you think about orthodoxy and orthopraxy as it pertains to your path. And if you're not a pagan and you watch this channel to learn about pagan perspectives, she said it, feel free to let us know what orthodoxy and orthopraxy mean in your realm of religion or non-religion as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.